Okay, this is chapter 2, lecture 2, on genes and prenatal development. So we're going to start out by talking very basically about what exactly genes are. Um, the beginning of life starts with the transmission of the genetic material that will ultimately create a new human being. And when we talk about genes, genes are made up of DNA. Most people have heard of DNA. It's short for deoxyribonucleic acid. This is a molecule that contains the chemical instructions for cells to manufacture various proteins. That's essentially what DNA does. It's a set of instructions. You can think of it like a cookbook. And what it does is it codes or provides the instructions to create proteins. And proteins are a very important part of what builds an organism. So it basically codes for just about everything through the coding of proteins. And some of those proteins that are coded will be proteins that create cells in our brain, which results in genes having an influence on behavior because of the genetic contribution to brain development, which is responsible for all of our behavior. Um, Now, chromosomes, so DNA promotes growth and it sustains life. Chromosomes, these are molecules of DNA, and DNA consists of 46 chromosomes arranged in 23 pairs. So this DNA is wound together, and it forms these structures called chromosomes. And the reason that we have 23 pairs is because we get 23 of these chromosomes, or half of our DNA, from our mother, and the other half, the other 23 of the 23 pairs, from our father, and that results in the 46 total chromosomes. And that is the set of instructions that will create an entire organism. So gametes are going to be responsible for the first stages of life, creating a new organism. Gametes are the reproductive cells. These are sperm for males, ova for females, or egg cells. Each gamete, as I mentioned, consists of 23 chromosomes. That's half the normal amount that are found in other cells in our body. So sex cells are different from all other cells in our body in that they only contain half of our DNA. 23 chromosomes instead of 46, or 23 chromosomes instead of 23 pairs of chromosomes. Now, so the first, we can say that life begins when the first cell forms. And that first cell is called a zygote. The zygote is produced when the two gametes, the sperm and the ovum, combine, and this produces a new individual which now has 23 pairs of chromosomes. Okay, because again, remember that we get 23 from our mother, from the egg cell, 23 from the father in the sperm cell, and the junction of these two gametes, the sperm and egg cells, that produces a new organism, and that's called the zygote. Now, genes, these are actually specific sections of a chromosome that carry instructions via for chemicals or for nucleic acids. That's where the nucleic acids, the A, T, C, and G, that's what makes up the deoxyribonucleic acid. These base pairs, what they're called. So each person has about 3 billion pairs of these nucleic acids. And it's the different configurations of these base pairs that actually makes each one of us unique. And it's also the overlap in the base pairs, in these pairs of nucleic acids, that is responsible for the similarity that you see between not only humans, but also between humans and other species as well. So here we're looking at a nucleus of a cell. Okay, this is where the DNA is held. Okay, inside of those chromosomes. These are the actual chromosomes themselves, the 23 pairs. You can see that this is one pair here. That's another pair. That's another pair. So this is inside the nucleus. And then a gene is just a segment or a small region of that chromosome. So this chromosome here, this is an unwound version of this chromosome over here. And again, looking at it at a smaller level, we see that a gene is this small area right here, and these would be the nucleic acids. So you'd have an A and a T here, and then a C and a G there, etc. And there would be a different arrangement depending on what the gene was and who the individual was. But those are responsible for creating amino acids, which are the basic building blocks of proteins. So genes are passed down from generation to generation. And what gets passed down is what's referred to as, is what makes up or creates a genotype. A genotype is an organism's genetic inheritance. It's all the genes that an individual has. It's unique for each organism, with the possible exception of one, which would be the case of identical or monozygotic twins. It's important to distinguish, though, between a genotype and a phenotype. So the genotype is the complete set of genes that an individual possesses. The phenotype, on the other hand, these are the observable characteristics of an organism, which include things like appearance, personality, intelligence, and all other traits. So all physical and all mental traits make up phenotype. So phenotype is the only thing that we can actually see. Okay, we could see the genotype if we were to look at the individual configuration of a person's genes. So if we were to look at all the genes that are contained on these chromosomes here, that's the only way we can actually see a genotype. But in the real world, what we see is a phenotype, and the phenotype is just what can be observed. So in some ways, the phenotype is all we ever see. And one other thing about a phenotype is that a phenotype also represents an interaction between genes and one's environment. So what I mean by this is that your genes interact with the environment to produce traits. And you could have the same set of genes, but if you are not exposed to something in the environment that would permit the development of a particular trait, then it's not going to be displayed. So for instance, one simple example would be something like skin complexion or skin tone. So that's a trait that is under the influence of genes, but of course you need to be exposed to sunlight in order for your skin tone to be a certain complexion. So, like I said, there are many genetic variations and many genetic similarities. Many genes are identical for every human being. That's why we all have a set of eyes, ears, nose, fingers, toes, things like that. Some genes vary slightly in their codes from one person to another. And so there's a gene, which, remember, is just a subsection of DNA on a chromosome. Okay, but there could be different types of genes, and those different types of genes are called alleles. Allele is a variation of a gene or any other possible forms in which a gene for a particular trait can occur. And the effects of variations vary greatly, causing life-threatening conditions to having no detectable effect at all whatsoever. So you could have a different gene than someone else, and what that basically means is that that difference in the type of gene that a person has can cause a life-threatening condition, or it could have no detectable effect at all whatsoever. So the human genome, this is the complete set of genes that all humans possess. So if we were to look at all possible genes that humans can have, this is what the human genome is. So there's a different genome or a different set of genes that can make up every species. So there's a genome for dogs, there's a genome for horses, a genome for different types of species of fish, etc. And again, it's the unique arrangement of those genes, or of those base pairs that make up the genes, that distinguishes each person. It allows the human species to adapt to pressures of the environment by having different types of genes. Because when the environment changes, some forms of that gene will be more advantageous than other forms. So when there are climate changes or illnesses, so if one individual is susceptible to an illness because of their genetic makeup and another individual is not, it's that genetic diversity that permits that person that is not susceptible to that illness to be at a greater likelihood of producing descendants and passing on those same genes so that their descendants are not susceptible to that illness as well. So the genome, this is the full set of genes that are the instructions to make an individual member of a certain species. Just to give you an idea of how similar our different genotypes are, the similarity between any two people chosen at random is 99.5%. This is obviously going to be higher if you're talking about a relative of yours, but on average, two people share about 99.5% of their genes, so very similar. And again, that's why we all look very similar to one another. We have, very similar looking eyes and ears and noses and faces and things like that. The similarity between humans and chimpanzees, which are our closest living relatives, is about 98%. Again, very similar. So it's just a small amount of genetic difference that makes a human quite different from a chimpanzee. And also, this 0.5% here is why you don't look exactly like or behave exactly like any other individual. The similarity between humans and every other mammal is about 90+%. So the Human Genome Project, this was a project that was initiated to try to identify, again, what the different genes are that humans possess. And it was actually somewhat surprising. They expected to find something like, 1 million genes or 100,000 genes, but they found that there were only about 20,000 different genes in humans. And the exact number, of course, is unknown because we haven't looked at everyone. But a new project called the HapMap, this is an international project that's trying to spot all the variations in the human genome. So far, they found 11 million variations among the billion chemical pairs. So I mentioned before that siblings or twins are exceptions to the general rule of how genetically similar we are to one another. Each sibling gets about 10,000 genes from each parent, because that's if we have 20,000 genes in total, that means that we have about 10,000 that come from our mother, 10,000 that come from our father. And let me just say one other thing about genes. It's also hard to say exactly what constitutes a gene, because remember that a gene is just a section of DNA on a chromosome. So where exactly does one gene start and another one gene start and another gene end? It's hard to say exactly. So that's why we don't know the exact number, but we know approximately that there seem to be about 20,000. There are millions of variations and billions of combinations possible. And so, again, that's why you don't tend to look exactly like any other person in this world unless you're an identical twin. And even then, you still don't look completely identical because it depends on environmental exposures as well. So monozygotic or identical